It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to this very important conversation with two stellar, standout world leaders. We have the honor of being in the presence of Ambassador Catalin Bugai. Ambassador Bugai has just recently finished her six-year term as the 15th permanent representative to the United Nations of Hungary. And of course, our dear friend, Ambassador Danon, who is a visiting professor of Yeshiva University and has recently concluded his term as the 17th permanent representative to the United Nations from the State of Israel. Welcome, welcome, ambassadors. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Hello. It's great to be back in spirit, at least in New York, and being in spirit in Jerusalem. So that's the best tonight.
Well, one of the advantages of this Zoom world is that we are always in New York and in Jerusalem and Hungary at the same time in our programming, and we are thrilled to welcome you. You know, your story, if I could start with Ambassador Bugai, your story is so fascinating, and you know, begins much earlier than your time in the United Nations. And this conversation is really centered around anti-Semitism and how we can fight against anti-Semitism, thinking about anti-Semitism globally, you know, more specifically perhaps in Europe. And your history with fighting this good fight, you know, begins before your term in the United Nations. And I just want to open to our audience, you know, here at Yeshiva University, we're the flagship Jewish university. So we are deeply concerned about issues relating to anti-Semitism. First of all, of course, because of the threats that it implies, but secondly, because our goal is to bring out our positive Jewish values and affect and spread positivity and peace throughout the world. And how to tackle and combat the scourge of anti-Semitism is certainly very much on our mind. So this conversation fits so well with our interest and our ambitions of raising the next generation of leaders. And having you on this in this conversation is particularly enjoyable because of who you are and what you stand for. Can you just begin telling us a little bit about your own story and relating to the Jewish people and with anti-Semitism specifically?
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. It's a big joy for me to see my good friend, Ambassador Danon. We really had a wonderful time, a very strong time together at the United Nations. I think we will talk about that later. And you have some great ambassadors who become your friends wherever you are. So I hope we will see each other with Danny very possible in the future as well, although in these COVID times, it's quite difficult. My story with fighting anti-Semitism, of course, goes back to my childhood. I was, don't forget, raised during communist Hungary. And during that time, it was not possible to talk about, for example, religion. It was, you know, it was not advised to be religious, whatever your religion was. And actually, I was raised in a little village where my father was a doctor. And there were only 3 Jewish families in this village. And it was a very multicultural village because there were Germans, Serbs, Croatians, Hungarians living together. And I was raised in a way that my father told me, you know, it doesn't matter who speaks what language, who has got what religion. I'm here to help everybody and to serve everybody. And that was a very important education for me as a child, I think. But what probably, Rabbi, you were referring to, that I was a television journalist, and in 1990, after the political changes, we started to talk about forbidden topics. So I was asked to make a program on Jewish religion, Jewish culture, Jewish history, Jewish people. And I am a Roman Catholic. And first, I didn't understand why I was asked to do that. I was not well educated for that. I thought I was not cut for that. And then they said, oh, yes, because you will ask the questions what probably we could not. It had two very important aspects. First of all, even the Hungarian Jewish people had to be, remembered and educated about their history, their life, their religion, their culture, their relationship with Israel and the world. And also the rest of the society had to understand what Jewish people, what kind of role Jewish people have always played in Hungary. So my idea was to create a program, not a ghetto program, but a program for everybody in which we really introduced this value added to our societies, to our history, what Jewish people gave to us. And don't forget the so-called golden age of Hungary was the time when in literature, in art, in economy, in the development of the country, Jewish people played a very, very influential role. But I remember when I started this program in 1990, first it was very difficult to find people who would be willing to talk about themselves and to talk about their history and their ancestors and their pain. And it took quite a long time to open them up and really to talk honestly about what they would like to teach us and how we who are not Jewish have to think about the pain and the history and the way of thinking, what they can share with us. And for me, that was always the key, understanding, listening, and sharing. And that's what I was also trying to do as an ambassador.
That is really so poignant and profound, and that especially comes from the lessons from your father of respecting and being an ambassador, not just to one's own people, but being an ambassador to the world, and thinking about how we're going to bring peoples together. Ambassador Danon, I assume there were more than 3 Jews in the village that you grew up in. How did you come? If we can, I love this starting from the roots. It's so powerful. How would you date or trace back, your development as a world leader combating global anti-Semitism from where you started to where you are now?
First of all, thank you very much, Rabbi Berman and Yeshiva University for hosting us today. Thank you, Kathleen, for joining. We used to meet in Israel once a year, and I hope that we will see you also in 2021, you and your husband, Thomas. We would love to host you very soon. So for me, I grew up in a very unique situation because my late father was wounded in the War of Attrition in 1969, and he was heavily wounded, unfortunately, and he lost his capability of moving and traveling in the land he so loved. So I was actually traveling for him, and that's how I learned our history, by taking hikes to Masada, learning about what happened in Masada, Golan Heights, and through those trips, I got involved about Jewish history, about the Bible, and I think when I was even 11 or 12, I started to express my views, and I never knew I would be the ambassador to the UN, but I got from my father the courage and the spirit to speak up, to stand behind my views. And, but the first shock for me was when I actually arrived to the UN, because, you learn about anti-Semitism, you read about it, but once you face it, it's different. And I recall my first encounter in the Security Council, where the ambassador of Venezuela, back then it was Ambassador Ramirez from Venezuela, and he compared the IDF, the same army that I served as an officer, he compared the IDF to the Nazis. And for me, it was unacceptable.
Wow.
And he used horrible language. And I fought very hard to ask him to apologize. And it took few good friends, including our friends from Hungary, the US, and other important countries. They pushed him until he issued an apology. But you know, the more you learn, the more you travel, you understand that we are facing a global problem. It's not unique to one country. We saw it also in the US, for sure in Europe, but unfortunately, wherever you will see a Jewish community, you will find anti-Semitism.
Well, you know, this is like on lifting the veil in the United Nations. You know, we know, of course, the public statements and the concerns of anti-Semitism that emerge, you know, just hearing what people are publicly saying. For the ambassadors who are in the private rooms, who are speaking with the other ambassadors, can you share with us your experiences? Do you feel that the ambassadors, you know, is that their internal feeling as well? Are there differences? Is behind closed doors, the camaraderie is much stronger, and there's a feeling of a joint battle? Or are people really even behind closed doors? You see this this type of anti-Semitic rhetoric take place?
It's a very interesting question, actually, because I was thinking about that a lot. Of course, it's very clear, and everyone knows in the United Nations, that Hungary is very much against Israel bashing, right? So we were very honestly fighting for a balanced standpoint. We were not afraid joining Israel and a few other countries in different cases and topics. We have been very strongly supporting Israel in the United Nations and in all the international arena. And I was thinking, why don't I speak to the ambassadors? You know, because you have a lot of good friends in a lot of places in the world, in the United Nations. What is it? What is it? What is for me obvious, and why is it not obvious for them, if you are talking about the topic? And now I'm frankly, although it's not exactly private conversation for us, but
it's very intimate. It's very
intimate. Yeah, I know. It's everything is intimate if we are on the web.
Only us.
On the web. But frankly, it was not the kind of anti-Semitism against Jewish people. It was rather against Israel. Mm-hmm. So obviously, that was immediately a kind of a distinction, because whenever I talk to, I don't want to say the names of the different ambassadors of the Arab countries. And then I said, but you know, what do you know, for example, about the Holocaust in Europe? Because we were brought up by the knowledge of that. So obviously our relationship to Israel is shaped by the history, by the Holocaust in Europe. And they said, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. I have got no problem with the Jewish people. I've got problem with the policies of Israel. And then you start talking about the policies, about their prejudices. And so we should need to have a lot of time, them to think, what are they doing or what are they talking about? But of course, it's a long process. So frankly, I even didn't tell Danny. I went to visit many Arab ambassadors because I wanted to understand, you know, where is their standpoint coming from? And obviously for us, you know, Hungary is based on Jewish Christian culture. I mean, you know, for us, it's very natural. And I never understood, you know, when they denied very fact what for us was part of our history, or for us it was fact of our upbringing. And here I want to say that really the only thing for me, the answer is really education from early childhood. And frankly, I must say, I was shocked when I found out that in America, it's not compulsory. The education about Holocaust is not compulsory, because in Hungary, it's compulsory. You know, it is part of our curriculum. And when there was a time I was State Secretary for Education and Culture, I signed an agreement with Yad Vashem to send Hungarian history teachers there to learn how to teach the Holocaust, because it's a very difficult issue. How do you teach the Holocaust for children, for older students, and so on? But for us, it's compulsory. It's part of the curriculum. And in many countries, it's not. Ambassador Danon referred to the fact that we were fortunate enough being invited to Israel really every year. And more ambassadors came. And I remember coming from Africa, from other parts of the world, they learned. They didn't know too much. They didn't understand. And by the end of the journey, which was also symbolically, I think, a spiritual journey for them, not only being there physically, they said, you know, now I understand much more. So I think it's also a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. But I would also say that we live, I always say, in this chaotic world. It's a chaos. The order is chaos, right? So in these uncertainties, people are more afraid. You know, they don't trust people. So the lack of trust, the uncertainties, the fear, it always brings up anti-Semitism.
Sure.
But I think we have to make a distinction if we talk about anti-Semitism in Europe, or we talk about anti-Semitism in Middle East or in Africa, because there are differences. The directions are different, where the kind of anti-Semitism is coming from.
So let's unpack this a little bit. There are so many rich points to discuss, both in terms of the private conversations with the ambassadors, as well as education as a vehicle to enlighten, and the problem, especially in a world filled with chaos and the fear of the other, and then to differentiate in different regions of the world. So there's a lot to unpack. Let me just start, Danny, if you can just talk about your private conversations, meaning your interactions with fellow ambassadors at the UN. You know, we are fascinated to unlift this veil. If after you had this tense standoff with an ambassador publicly, if afterwards you went out to drinks and were able to talk it through, like, how was the private conversations? Where did you see that different, or were you able to break through people's personal prejudices, you know, in your personal interactions?
Absolutely, Rabbi. So both me and Katalin, you know, we practice diplomacy through personal relationships. You know, we hosted people, and we used to have a lot of discussions behind closed doors. And I want to start with the issue of education. You know, I had the honor to take with me more than 100 UN ambassadors to Israel. And on the way to Israel, we stopped in Poland. We participated in the March of the Living, or if it was in the winter, we traveled ourselves in the death camps. And that was a tremendous experience for all of us. But few of the ambassadors told me, Danny, we never knew about the Holocaust. And I was shocked, because most of the ambassadors to the UN are very knowledgeable, very smart individuals. But some of them were very honest. They told me, Danny, we never knew the facts. And when I fought at the UN, because whenever somebody actually used the word Holocaust to compare it to something else, I stood up and said, you cannot use that word. And they never understood why. But after they walked into Auschwitz, they would never use the word Holocaust to compare anything else. And we have a lot of atrocities in Africa, all over the world. And before, they told me, yeah, it's also a Holocaust, what happened in my country. And I told them, no, you cannot use that word. And after the trip to Israel and to Poland, they understood why. Regarding our Arab colleagues that Kathleen mentioned, that's fascinating, because Personally, most of the ambassadors on private conversation were very friendly. We collaborated to fight Iran and extremist forces in the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others. But when it came to a public event, they were very cautious. They were willing to participate in Jewish events. So they would go to speak to a Jewish community, but not to do anything with me as the Israeli representative. Mm-hmm. And I told them, why you are not doing it? What's the problem? And the answer I got is that the public opinion in their country it's a problem and they're not ready yet. And I told them, yes, but that's leadership. Once you will acknowledge, you will show the public that everything is moving in the right direction. And today we are seeing it with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and we are very grateful for that. So I think we should push more. Those who are speaking quietly with us to be stronger, to be brave, to speak publicly about what we are doing, and that will actually bring the public to that point.
So it's both education on the one hand and leadership on the other, and more of a grounds up and a top down approach. Ambassador Bugui was talking about compulsory education, which is fascinating that in Hungary, part of the core education is to study about the Holocaust. Do you see that as a vehicle for countries around the world to teach from the ground up the history?
I think it's very important. And you talked about the importance of leadership. I think one point is really the education, and the leaders should, decide that we have to educate the children about the fact what the Holocaust was, because without that, they would never really understand Israel. That was my narrative, that I told them the story of Europe. I told them our story, and they had to understand that. But also talking about political leadership. I mean, for example, in Hungary, we have law enforcement and legal measures. So denying the Holocaust in Hungary is a crime because we believe it's a crime. I know it's not everywhere. And I know about the discussion, whether freedom of speech or whatever, but we believe, that it is a crime denying the Holocaust. And not enough to educate the Holocaust, but remembrance. So, and then I come back actually to the importance of communication, because we need to work together really with the media and with the journalists and with everyone, influencers, who have got an effect on the people. Because one thing is we have to communicate what we are talking about. And the other thing is the political leadership within a country, which will say, like in Hungary, we have zero tolerance against anti-Semitism. And this is a political fact. So it's also important, and we believe in Hungary that the revival of Jewish culture, the cultural life, brings other parts of the society, of the communities, close to the existence of being Jewish. I'm honest with you that before our today meeting, I called a very good friend of mine who is British Hungarian and Jewish. At the moment, living Hungary, has been living Hungary for quite a long time, because I wanted to really ask him that how does he feel being a Jewish guy, a British Jewish guy in Hungary, whether he had any feeling or incidents or whatever. And also, what does he think about Britain, what's going on there and what happened there? And I think this is what we need. We need to have an outreach, and we need to be able to communicate these personal experiences towards other people as well, so that they could understand better what's going on. Because I said that the lack of trust today is something what is very influential in the world. The lack of trust in politicians as well, it goes with that. So we need to have people who can tell their own stories, so that so that other people could trust them and believe in them. And this is very, very difficult actually nowadays. Ambassador Danon is much closer to politics than I am because he's a great politician. But I really believe that for politicians today is the biggest challenge, how they can be trusted in the world, because without trust, it's very difficult to talk about anything. So if we want the people understand what a big threat it is if we give an open door to anti-Semitism, because it's only one part of hate crime, hate speech, and whatever, you know, it is like a volcano. When we open this door, it's unstoppable. It's very, very dangerous. So we need politicians, leadership, working together with good communication, education. And yes, I believe that laws and legal measures are also very, very important.
You know, you mentioned, Ambassador, the chaos of the world. Certainly exacerbated in a time of coronavirus and a worldwide pandemic and the uncertainty of our future. And it can lead to this, you know, demonization of the other and the fear of the other and the uncertainty. I wonder in education if it could also lead to a sense of a shared human experience, meaning there's something that we all share as we all fight against this terrible health consideration and concern. Is there something that can bring us together today in a way that will bring mutual understanding and respect as we fight together and join the same side and deal with the existential difficulties and pains of being human, you know, in this contemporary age. Danny, you have thoughts about education and what are the ways that we could bring people together? What are the positive ways that we could bring people together?
So first, I agree with you, Rabbi, that in times of crisis, unfortunately, we see that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Whenever you have a pandemic, you know, they blame the Jews for that. And we also saw it with COVID. Even here with the Palestinian Authority, at the beginning, instead of cooperating with us and fighting together, they blamed us for spreading the disease, which is horrible blood libel. I think, yes, we have to cooperate. And we have to start with the governments. And whenever we saw an incident of anti-Semitism, as an Israeli official, you know, we condemned it, but we expect the governments to be responsible for the well-being of the Jews. So if a massacre happened in Pittsburgh, US, we would expect the US to take the actions to protect the Jewish communities. Same for Hungary, France, you name it. And that's what we are doing publicly. We are very happy that many countries signed the definition of IHRA regarding anti-Semitism. Hungary did it, I think, exactly a year ago, February 2000, more than a year ago, 2 years ago. And we want to see more leaders taking the initiative, speaking about this issue, including it in the curriculum, and not just ignoring it. So when I was in Poland with the ambassador, we visited the Pauline Museum in Warsaw, which is a very impressive museum where you actually understand that anti-Semitism was in Europe for centuries. It didn't start with the Holocaust. It was for centuries. And my first question was, how many Polish kids are attending the museum? Not how many Jewish groups or delegations come to visit. And according to the answer I got, it was impressive to see that the Polish government is actually bringing tens of thousands of the school to attend, the school children to attend and to learn from the museum. So I think we need to demand more from the leadership to make it mandatory.
And do you see, what can Israel do in a positive way to bring about a greater global understanding and partnership?
I think that Israel should be the bridge that actually provide the ideas, the platforms for education seminars, tools, educate the educators. So I think, we can and we should do more in terms of sending people from Israel, scholars, to speak in different communities, not to the Jewish community. That's usually what's happened. You will see Israelis coming and speaking to the Jewish communities. But I think we should do more than that and actually send Israelis to speak to teachers and educators worldwide and provide them the know-how and the tools to pass the information.
Well, and on that note, I'd be remiss if I did not mention that we just inaugurated the Jenny and Emil Fish Center of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Yeshiva University to educate the educators, because we believe in education, and education is not just a window to the world, but it's a light into one's own soul. And by studying and learning, you develop who you are as a person. What we're doing is exactly, Danny, what you said about educating in the United States. The different states who have taken positions to encourage Holocaust education all throughout the country. We want to teach them. We want them to know the story. We want them to be able to communicate it over to the next generation as a crucial element. Ambassador Abugi, we spoke about the Judeo-Christian story, and it's really, there's a complexity here that I wonder if we could think through. Because as was mentioned, Danny just mentioned, anti-Semitism in Europe is not something that began at the Holocaust. I'm personally a medieval scholar. That is my area of focus. I lived in like 11th to 13th century France and England for many years in the books in the library. And studying Jewish-Christian relations was a very primary focus. And the way that the anti-Semitism bubbled up from a religious perspective into a secular one, in the modern era, highlights how deeply rooted, this feeling is. So on the one hand, there's a joint Judeo-Christian story and ethic, which allows us to overcome. And on the other, there's also a joint history that we need to work through. How do you see this play itself out, like this deeply rooted joint story, playing to fruition in this modern world?
Well, I mentioned this young man whom I just talked to, and I asked him. I lived in England for 13 years, and I moved there in the early 90s, and I was really very happy to live in a country which I thought didn't have anti-Semitism. Jewish people lived there freely and happily. Cromwell let them in, right? I mean, you are the historian. So relatively, they were not persecuted. We, in our part of the world, we had a lot of Hungarians who fled Hungary during Nazism to England. The same happened in America. And then nowadays, what do I see? I look around and I could not believe that I see anti-Semitism, for example, in Britain. What has happened? What's going on? Yeah. And I go back again to the role and to the responsibility of politicians, because one thing is that through Brexit, we know a lot of movements were opened up, and people were using language and were behaving in a way which was unthinkable previously, I would say, in Britain. But also, when you have a politician who happens to be a leader of a main party in Britain, who does what he does, this is something what you could have, again, not ever believed that it could happen, for example. So I think the situation, I don't think so that we can generalize this question, why and how is anti-Semitism in Western Europe, because Britain is different, France is different, Germany is different, Belgium or Netherlands, they are also different. We see the rise of anti-Semitism, but we know the old type of anti-Semitism, but we see also the new type of anti-Semitism nowadays. And obviously, I read just recently a very interesting report, actually. From the Tel Aviv University, and they were analyzing the difference. They were differentiating this type of anti-Semitism in these different countries, and obviously where hate speech is much more allowed or much more natural. Hate speech is just the first step. And obviously, anti-Semitism comes up very quickly. But also, we can see that there have been a lot of movements in Western Europe, and many people brought with themselves, moving into these countries, anti-Semitism. We have to talk about that, because this is really a danger, and this is dangerous. And if Ambassador Danon was talking about that, we met many ambassadors in the United Nations who didn't really have an understanding about the Holocaust, or about Israel, or about the religion itself, or the history itself. So then there are a lot of people coming from different parts of the world. They don't know anything, but probably they bring the hatred of the Jews with themselves. And that is very, very dangerous. So I think this is, again, a question of political leadership, how you integrate these people, and how you shape their way of thinking, because it can be very damaging in the surrounding where they live. I think that obviously, if it gets to the political arena, and if it gets openly to the public, then there will be always people who will be going with this idea. And that is why it's very important that we talk. I really believe that we talk. For example, if I meet someone whom I feel, made a remark or whatever, and then I talk, because that's the only way. So I ask them, so why do you say that? Why do you think you are right? And then at the end, probably you can get somewhere. Of course, you can't talk to everybody who is anti-Semitic around you, but the importance of discussion is very important, I think, and very influential. And just to go back to the Jewish-Christian dialogue, I mean, obviously, if you are brought up in a way that you know that your culture, your identity is based on that, it's easier for you to understand. Having said that, we talk about, I would say, the Western European civic nationalism, of course. This is different from ethnic nationalism. So again, Eastern Europe is different from Western Europe, or from the Middle East in that sense, because it's totally different approach. I mean, you lived in Britain, British are British. So normally that would be the idea. And then you can be whatever, you can live whatever God you believe in, or you can come from whatever nationality. But nowadays, I think ethnic nationalism has become stronger. And that also brings up the threat of the kind of attacks against people who are different.
Right.
If you are Jewish, you are different. If you live in a country or in a society where are few Jews. And not everybody's father would teach the child that, I don't care who has got what kind of religion or language speaks, or so. And we go back again to education. We have to educate the educators, and that's role. And also, just one last point, that I also very much believe in the role of culture. I just say an example. In Hungary, in Budapest, the old historic Jewish quarter, which is around the Grand Synagogue, was a very rundown part of Budapest. And then we started actually to create a cultural hub. And not now, because now the world is closed, but everyone wanted to come to Mazel Tov, because that was the most popular bar in the old Jewish quarter. What does that mean? We wanted to create a circle of people who would then create another circle, and it became fashionable to come to Budapest, to study that circle, to understand Jewish life and culture. We created, culture festivals and invited people from all over the world, because culture, is so impulsive, so sexy, so effective. So you hear klezmer music and then it takes you in, and then you can start talking about exactly how you build the bridges between, for example, Christians and Jews.
Sure. So, I mean, it's amazing with all the differences that we need to think through: the old anti-Semitism, the new anti-Semitism, the different countries and the different histories. But it seems like the themes, or three themes that emerge from this conversation, is education, leadership, and culture. Education, leadership, and culture as a vehicle to tackle the problems of this time. Danny, can you give us words of hope? Where do you see us going in a brighter future as in these areas of leadership, education, culture, bringing people together?
So I'm optimistic by nature. And I think, you concluded very nice, Rabbi. And I think in order to make the connection between the education, leadership, and culture, we can use Israel as a connector, and we have the knowledge, we have the know-how, culture we have, but we know there's also a lot of culture in other places that we can, in the Jewish world and other places. But I think Israel can be a key component in helping it, not from a place that we come to solve the problem. As I said before, it is the responsibility of the government to make sure that the Jews feel safe today in Europe and the US and everywhere else. I want to see most Jews living in Israel, but I want them to make aliyah, to move to Israel by choice, not because they are afraid to go with a yarmulke, but because they just want to move to Israel. And I demand it from the government. And I think what we spoke today about those three pillars, I think Israel can be very active in providing the technology, the knowledge to support it. And I'm optimistic because I see that the Jewish communities today, despite anti-Semitism, are strong, flourishing. And for sure, when you look at what we have in Israel today, it's a miracle. So despite everything we spoke about today, which was negative most of the time, we should stay optimistic.
Well, let me just say as we wrap up this conversation that I am very, very thankful to each of your parents who have raised their children with the values and inspiration to be leaders in our world in such positive and important ways. So we thank them and your stories for bringing you to this point. Ambassador Bogi, Ambassador Danon, it's really an honor and privilege to host you both and to continue working with you to build a brighter world.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you, Yeshiva University. And thank you, Kathleen. And we're looking forward to see you in Jerusalem soon.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was an honor for me to meet you, Rabbi and Danny. We would love to go to Israel. Tomasz is sending his best regards to you and Tani, and I would say everyone should go to Jerusalem, because that's really the most beautiful city in the world, and then would understand what we are talking about. And don't forget, I'm coming from the land of Theodor Herzl.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.